Welcome to the part 3 of a 6-part series on understanding the science of exposure in photography. In this video, you will learn all about shutter. If you haven't, then watch the part 1 and 2 of the series by clicking here. I will also link it in the description below. This will make sense and you will follow the course systematically. Just a recap, there are 4 factors which decides exposure, and in first part of the series we discussed about the first factor, that is light level in the scene. And in the second part, everything about aperture was discussed with the help of mathematical illustrations. In this part 3 video, you will learn all about third factor, and that is shutter. Shutter is a physical barrier between aperture and a sensor. It opens for a designated amount of time when you click for taking the photograph and allow the light to enter and hit the sensor, and then it recloses. The time span between opening and closing will decide how much light would enter. Naturally, if this time span is less, that means if the shutter speed is fast, it will allow less light to enter. Reciprocally, if the shutter speed is less, that means if the time span for which the shutter remains open is more, then more light would be allowed to enter the camera. Time span is calculated in seconds or its fraction. If you double the time for which the shutter remains open, it will allow double the light to enter. Reciprocally, if the time is halved, then the amount of light entry is also reduced by 50%. Let us understand it further with this mathematical illustration. Say for example, for a shutter speed of 1 second, the time for which the shutter remains open, the amount of light allowed to enter is 100 units. Then for 2 seconds of shutter time, it will be 200 units. For a shutter speed of half second, the amount of light allowed will be 50 units. And for 1/4 of a second, the light allowed will be 25 units, and so on. This doubling or halving of a shutter speed is called one stop. Remember, we studied about this stop in reference to the aperture in part 2 of this series. So in common language, when we say that increase the exposure by one stop, then essentially we are saying that either reduce the shutter speed by half or double the aperture size. Let me explain it again other way around. If you are saying that decrease the exposure by one stop, then it means you double the shutter speed or half the f number. Say for example, in a given situation, we are using an aperture of f8 and a shutter speed of 1/100 second. If we want to reduce the exposure by one stop, then you will either make the aperture f11, which is half the size of f8, or you will increase the shutter speed to 1/200 second, which again will reduce the exposure by one stop. Now whether to change the aperture or whether to change the shutter speed has to be decided by what final appearance you want for the image. Hold on for a while. I am going to discuss all these in the part 5 of this series when we discuss about exposure modes. Shutter also has an additional function of either revealing or freezing the subject motion. I have a full video on how to use shutter speed creatively. Check the link in the description. See you next time in the part 4 of this crash course, wherein we will discuss about ISO and its role in deciding the exposure.